Okay, so when you look at a map of Europe, Estonia seems to fit right in, tucked away there on the Baltic Sea. But if you start to peel back the layers, you find this deep, fascinating mystery. The Estonian people are basically an ancient island, culturally and linguistically, and the story of how they got there is this epic journey that crosses continents and thousands of years. And it all kicks off with one big question.
Right, here's the central puzzle. Estonians are completely surrounded by people speaking Germanic languages, Slavic languages, but their own language? It sounds like it's from another planet. Seriously, it's not just a little different, it's from a whole other family tree. So what in the world is going on?
Just listen for a second. In Estonian, welcome is tere tulemast. In neighboring Russia, it's dobro pожаловать. In German, willkommen. You don't have to be a language expert to hear it, right? One of these things is not like the others. And that's because Estonian belongs to a totally separate group, the Uralic language family.
To get to the bottom of where Estonians come from, we have to follow the clues. And our first big clue is the language itself. Understanding this unique language family is the key. It's the thing that's going to point us thousands of kilometers away from the Baltic.
See, Uralic languages are built on a completely different blueprint. They use something called agglutination. Think of it like building words with Legos, just snapping new pieces onto the end. They have vowel harmony, which creates this really cool musical quality, where all the vowels in a word have to be in the same key. And, bonus for anyone trying to learn it, there's no grammatical gender, no masculine or feminine words to memorize. Now, all these features are super rare in Europe, but they're really common across Northern Asia, which is our first big hint that the homeland is somewhere far to the east.
For centuries, all we had was the language. It was a great clue, but not quite hard proof. But now we have modern genetics, and genetics has given us the absolute smoking gun. By looking at the DNA of Estonians today, scientists found a direct, undeniable link to the ancient people of Siberia.
So check this out. When you look at the genetic recipe for an Estonian, most of it, about 90%, is the same stuff you see in their neighbors. A mix of ancient European hunter-gatherers and early farmers. But then there's this other slice of the pie, about 10%, and that small but crucial piece traces directly back to ancient Siberia.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because that creates a huge question. If the genetic footprint of these Siberian migrants was so small, how on earth did they manage to completely replace the language of the people already living there? How could such a small group have such a massive, overwhelming cultural impact that it still defines Estonia today?
Well, the answer is in this specific genetic signature, haplogroup N. It's a marker on the Y-chromosome, so it gets passed down directly from father to son, almost like a family surname written in DNA. This marker is the concrete proof. It's the unbroken genetic thread that connects a huge number of Estonian men all the way back to a homeland in the forests of ancient Siberia.
And because we have this genetic marker, we can actually trace their journey. It's like a prehistoric GPS tracker. We can follow the path these proto-Uralic speakers took as they moved west, carrying their language and their genes on an incredible migration that would totally reshape the future of the Baltic region.
The story kicks off more than 6,000 years ago, way over near Lake Baikal in Siberia. Then, around 2300 BCE, these groups get caught up in a massive technological revolution. Using rivers as their highways, they began to move, crossing the Ural Mountains, and finally, after a journey that took 2,000 years, they arrived on the shores of the Baltic Sea.
And here's the thing, they didn't just show up empty-handed. These weren't simply nomads. These guys were master metalworkers, the tech innovators of their day. They were part of something called the Seme-Turbino phenomenon, and they had these incredibly advanced bronze casting skills that basically gave them a superpower, a huge technological edge over everyone they met.
Which brings us to this dramatic moment on the shores of the Baltic, the arrival of these proto-Uralic speakers, these tech-savvy migrants, into the lands that would one day be Estonia. Well, it set the stage for the creation of a whole new people.
So just picture the two groups. On one hand, you have the newcomers, highly mobile hunter-fishers with Siberian roots, armed with these cutting-edge bronze weapons. On the other hand, you have the locals, farmers and herders, probably living in fortified villages. I mean, these are two completely different worlds about to collide.
And let's be clear, this was not always a peaceful meeting of cultures, not even close. Linguists have looked at the words that were exchanged between these groups, and they paint a really tense picture. We're talking about loanwords for things like slave and poison. That tells you this was a pretty brutal time, a real struggle for who would come out on top.
And out of this long, centuries-long process of mixing and conflict, a new people was born. Genetically, they were built on that local European foundation. But their language, and that key part of their ancestry passed down from father to son, that came directly from those Siberian newcomers. The Estonian people had been forged.
But being forged in the Bronze Age was just the beginning. The story wasn't over. In fact, you could say the fight for survival had just started. This new Estonian identity would be tested again and again for centuries, in a story of just incredible resilience.
And the list of threats is just relentless. First, you get the Northern Crusades, with Danish and German knights trying to take control. Then, they're swallowed up by the Swedish Empire. After that, they're conquered by the Russian Empire. And in the 20th century, the absolutely devastating Soviet occupation. For hundreds and hundreds of years, bigger powers tried to dominate them and wipe their culture out.
And yet, they couldn't do it. Through every single invasion, every war, every brutal attempt to stamp it out, the core of that Estonian identity, that unique language and culture that began its journey 4,000 years earlier in Siberia, it held on. It endured.
So, let's tie it all together. What is that unbroken thread? What connects that deep, ancient past to the vibrant, high-tech, modern Estonia that we see today?
Well, maybe the best way to sum it up is a concept they share with their Finnish cousins, sisu. It's one of those words that's tough to translate, but it means something like an extraordinary, stubborn, unbreakable will. It's courage and determination when the odds are completely stacked against you. That's the spirit that drove their ancestors across a continent, and it's the exact same spirit that kept their identity alive through centuries of hardship.
It really is a single, unbroken thread of language, culture, and ancestry stretching all the way from the ancient forests of Siberia right into the digital heart of modern Tallinn.
And that kind of leaves us with one final, pretty staggering thought. When you consider everything, the migrations, the conflicts, the technological revolutions, and centuries of foreign rule, it just makes you wonder, what does it truly take for a language and for a people to survive for 4,000 years against all odds?